Welcome to Landmark Talks Property, a podcast by Landmark Information Group that covers all things property in short and intelligent podcasts. This is episode 3 of our mini-series on development due diligence. In this episode, we're bringing in supplier and sector-wide perspectives. You'll hear insights from those working across planning, utilities, infrastructure and development support, as well as practitioners who navigate these challenges with clients every day. This wider lens helps us understand the pressures, expectations and realities shaping development decisions across the industry. Let's get into it.
So, Sally, I don't know if you can help us. So if we're talking about the added value of people, and there's always someone at the centre, whether or not, the extra work that they need, the extra workload that they have can be taken off them through data, through AI. But what do you think, expert interpretation actually means?
For us, it's being able to look at all of the data that's on a particular site and being able to review how historical maps have changed over time, to identify those land uses, to be able to provide a risk assessment. What we do is with contaminated land, we're building a conceptual site model really. So we're using all the historical maps, we're using all of the environmental data that tells us whether we've got landfills, waste sites on there. Then we're looking at the geology data and we're seeing what the site's like underneath and whether contaminants can move from site or not. And then we're also looking at types of receptors. So we're looking at, are there schools next door? Are there residential gardens? Is there an aquifer underneath the ground? Are there any streams? And we're building this conceptual site model so that we can then provide a risk assessment. Is there going to be significant harm to people or to any receptors, controlled waters? So being able to build that model in our head to then be able to put that in summary into a report is crucial. And the same with flood risk as well. So you can use flood data, but it's all based on kind of bare earth scenario. So for instance, you could have somewhere where it says it's got high pluvial surface water risk. But actually, because there's a depression, and it could be like a office building with car park underneath. So obviously it assumes all the water's going to be going underneath and it's going to completely flood. The depths are going to be really high. But when you actually have a look at aerial imagery and street level imagery, you can see that there are drains there. You can see that it's a car park. You can understand what the context is of that site. So then you can see actually the water's likely to dissipate. The depth's going to be a lot less than what the model actually says. And therefore the risk is a lot lower. So for us being able to, we use all these models, we use all this data, but for us to be able to interpret it and actually to assess the risk is really important. And then being able to provide those bespoke kind of recommendations afterwards about what to do next is really crucial. There's some instances, something that springs to mind, which affected me from going home once, was that there was a police station in the town where I lived, and had an environmental consultant looked at that before, we could have potentially have said that there might have been some issues. Anyway, it wasn't really flagged up. It was a police station, so they didn't think anything was wrong with it. When they came to the build, they started to dig and they found this cylindrical object, immediately thought it was a bomb, closed the road, bearing in mind there's just one road in, one road out, so it caused absolute havoc. But I think if they'd had environmental report done before, we would have said there was a potential for underground storage tanks. So they might have actually been slightly aware that there would have been something there rather than closing the whole road off. Obviously, it was an underground storage tank. It wasn't a bomb.
Yeah. Oh, dear.
What about you, Teresa? Did you?
Yeah. So I guess just to repeat the question, which was how do we define kind of the value that professionals add
and
bring.
what is that definition of expert interpretation on top of the data?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I think that in my view, expert interpretation means that professionals bring not just the knowledge about what data means on paper, and that kind of what is it showing you, and obviously what are the constraints, etc. But I think that there is also this aspect of bringing your experience and kind of having kind of seen and done things previously that immediately helps kind of add an extra layer of information to what you're looking at. That is about, if you immediately understand the type of sites, then, there's going to be triggers that you have as an expert that is going to kind of help your thought process kind of just go down the list of, possible issues. And so as good as we could get a program to kind of give us a report on risks and risk assessment, when somebody has looked at these maps, for years, I think that's part of that expert thing. I think for me also, the expert kind of comes in as well when you're working on any project and there is an immediate issue or there is something that comes up that is unusual. That's where, that expertise comes to bear, where, no machine can tell you, what to do next. You're going to have that experience kind of brought in and immediately be able to kind of say, okay, well, we need these things done, or, let's go and redo this report or whatever it is. But it's also that, that reaction to what you're presented with. When you're kind of delivering projects on site, I mean, that's so important that the entire design team and construction team and client team are all able to actually address challenges as they come up. So for me, I've seen it time after time, the kind of those situations where you just need to get around the table and triage an issue. And I feel like, that's where we are irreplaceable.
I would echo everything Teresa said. There's the market experience. There's a real value, I think, in these kind of transactions. You've been through the process, you've been working in the area, you have that knowledge of how these transactions run. And so it equips you perfectly to deal with things that because you know how they're going to turn out, and equally anything that comes up that's unforeseen, which happens regularly after all, doesn't it? So. Yeah.
And the human component, because all of these things need to be resolved with other people, right?
Exactly. And there's always a human sort of behind the transaction, isn't there? Always.
Yeah.
With their motivations, whether it's buying a lovely house, that there's the emotional investment of that, whether it's a commercial transaction, but it's a similar thing. So yeah, that's very much understanding that as well is critical.
So let's move on to some sector perspectives, because we've got a nice sort of range, I think, across in this group. So, Key, I just wanted to ask, from a legal perspective, are there any particular pinch points, or what do you think the biggest risks are sort of emerging in development transactions?
Well, there's huge, planning is at the beginning of the process anyway, it's the very start. But there's a real sort of constraint there at the moment, which, the government has recognised and they are trying to deal with. But is the biggest thing is lack of resource. I'm trying to ring people in local authorities and often there's no one we can speak to a lot of the time. It's really difficult, I think, for developers at the moment to get things moving and to keep them moving, because sometimes you can start it and then you can't continue. So that's the biggest problem at the moment is the lack of resource, I think. Then once you've got something started, it's keeping it going, and that's where all these hopefully efficiencies are coming in that we're seeing. The changes to try and speed things up. I think if you had the people in the first place, I don't think we'd be having the speed issues, because I think we're trying to speed things up without more people, which is not, I mean, yes, you can do a certain amount with tech, that will help, but as we've discussed, that's not the overall answer. So I think, it's going to be interesting to see how that develops. But for me, it's definitely the lack of resources, the key thing. It's not, I mean, yes, it's the planning process and at the beginning, but it's along the route then. It's sort of, construction and labor and all the way along the supply chain, it seems there's those struggles.
Teresa, do you think that current market conditions are affecting like demand for your services as a supplier?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. I mean, because we're a kind of engineering consultancy, and we kind of work across the life cycle of projects. So from very early feasibility and kind of, planning the plan all the way to construction and kind of, operation and maintenance. I'm not sure that we're having like a lack of demand at the moment. I think it's possibly, if I think more about the early stages of the process. So I think once you get to site, you have a program and a budget to deliver. I think that's kind of like, that's there, like everyone has put all the money that needs to be put in and financing and everything. So, when we're providing our services in that kind of, scheme design and full design, etc., then I think that just flows. I think in the kind of earlier parts of kind of the planning and development, there's always like that kind of public procurement aspect that we go through in terms of kind of supporting like new towns and kind of doing the planning for new towns that are kind of outside the kind of your urban areas as well. So I think it's challenging because everybody bids for those. So so we are a company that bids for those as well. So we've been lucky now that there's been quite a few of these procurements done and these tenders done for planning services for new towns. So I think that's happening. But again, it's always a competition. So I don't know if it's changed so much. And then from a kind of digital standpoint, which is perhaps where I'm more involved in, again, there is like the big kind of public sector clients. So, they're only really like these big digitization projects are only going to be once or twice, done. Hopefully they only need to do it once. And, once each of these big organizations do it, then that's done. So, I mean, we just finished a really large program, which was NUAR, which was about kind of digitizing, kind of, making available this underground data. So I don't know, like there, we fulfill that need. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting.
Do you, working with clients, have you noticed they are a bit more risk aware in the current market, thinking about the additional data that's available, or that the issues like climate change are sort of in general conversation and people, I suppose, know about them in general life, whereas contaminated land maybe not so much?
Yeah, I mean, contaminated land, I think, I feel like it's starting to be forgotten about a little bit because everyone's focusing on climate change a lot of the time. So climate change is something that obviously we're talking a lot to our clients about. And obviously that's always evolving all the time. We've got different risks that are coming up, and obviously we're trying to find the data for those and seeing whether we can get them site specific. But there are a lot of environmental risks now that they have to look for. And probably I've become more risk aware of all the different things that are out there. And there's lots more things for us to have talked about.
I was just going to say, I think they might be getting back into contaminated land because the government in its environmental improvement plan for this year is sort of trying to assess the state of it, aren't they? And trying to get it out of the planning regime into more mainstream development. So, we may see an increased focus on that, I think.
Yeah, which will be, it's obviously good for us in terms of it. And it's better to build on brownfield sites if they can. So if there's brownfield first, then obviously you've got the grey belt as well that's being introduced. So that kind of introduces more complex sites that we're going to have to be probably looking at. Whether it's going to be complicated to be able to remediate all some of those sites, especially some of the brownfield ones.
Well, I think that's why they've been avoided so far, isn't it? That's
the
part of the problem. And that's why councils haven't maybe been designating them as contaminated land and just waiting for the planning regime to pick that up.
Yeah.
Do you think that the planning reforms and the changes will make any difference to that? Because ultimately it's about money, isn't it? So the cost of redeveloping on brownfield land, and particularly, I suppose, the brownfield land that's left is like it costs a lot. And it might mean that certain developments are not worth doing. So, I mean, do you think any changes have meant that development will happen on those sites now?
I don't think it's likely to make things more. Well, I think where it will help rather is in the speed of finding out whether a site is going to be viable or not. Because if you've got better information and if there's encouragement, policy encouragement to build a certain way in a certain area, then that will have an impact for some developers, depending on what it is they're trying to build. So it will, it can change things, but the viability overall is obviously, that's the major consideration. So it's going to have to be feasible to do that, for people to be able to do it. What it hopefully means, the data will mean that people will know upfront whether it's feasible or not before they spend a long time planning things and going, a certain way down that route, only to discover then that actually it doesn't work. Hopefully the changes that we're seeing are helping make things a bit smoother. I think that's about as far as we can go.
Thank you for listening to episode 3 of our mini-series on development due diligence. In episode 4, our final episode, we'll bring everything together and look at how Landmark supports complex development cases, followed by closing thoughts and future trends from our guests. We hope you'll join us for the final part in our series. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, please hit subscribe. This podcast is for general information purposes only. The views expressed are those of the hosts and guests and do not constitute professional advice.